Sarah had always been the pillar of her family, unwavering, dependable, and loving. She was a devoted wife to Alex and a doting mother to their two children, Emma and Noah. Her life, by all outward appearances, seemed to be everything she had ever dreamed of. Yet, beneath the surface, an unsettling tension had been building in her marriage, one that she could no longer ignore. Alex had changed. He wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. The little things that once made their life together feel magical, his affectionate gestures, the late-night conversations, had become fewer and farther between. Every evening, when Alex came home from work, he seemed more distant. His smile, once warm and genuine, now felt forced. His eyes no longer sparkled when he looked at her, and she began to wonder if the love they once shared had simply faded away. At first, Sarah convinced herself that it was just the pressures of life, his demanding job, the kids' activities, the endless responsibilities. But deep down, she knew it was something more. She couldn't put her finger on it, but something was wrong. It wasn't just the long hours he was working or the days he came home late. It was the little things, the text messages he would quickly hide when she entered the room, the unexplained phone calls he'd take in another room, his increasing need for privacy. She had always trusted Alex, but lately, doubt crept into her heart. She found herself questioning his actions, wondering if there was someone else. It wasn't the first time her mind had wandered to such dark places, but now, the thoughts felt more like a looming storm. Sarah tried to dismiss her suspicions. She told herself she was overreacting, imagining problems where there were none. But there was an undeniable heaviness in the air between them, a silent barrier that neither of them had acknowledged. She longed to bring it up to Alex, but every time she considered confronting him, fear took over. What if she was wrong? What if it was all in her head? The thought of accusing him without evidence felt like a betrayal in itself, and the idea of their marriage crumbling under the weight of suspicion terrified her. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Sarah noticed Alex's distracted gaze. He barely touched his food, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Sarah tried to initiate a conversation, but Alex's responses were short and absent. He was physically present, but emotionally, he was a million miles away. The silence between them grew heavier with each passing minute. She wanted to ask him directly, what was going on? Why was he so distant? But the words stuck in her throat, frozen by the fear of what the answer might be. Later that night, as Sarah lay in bed, her mind raced. She thought back to the early years of their marriage, when everything had been so different. They had been inseparable, partners in every sense of the word. They shared everything, their hopes, their fears, their dreams. But now, Sarah felt like a stranger to him. Was this what marriage had become? She wondered if it had always been like this, and she just hadn't seen it. The thought made her heart ache. Sleep eluded her that night. She kept replaying the moments when Alex's behavior seemed off, his sudden late-night meetings, his increasingly evasive answers, the distance between them that grew wider with each passing day. It was as if a slow unraveling was happening right before her eyes, and she had no idea how to stop it. The next morning, Sarah tried to push the thoughts away. She focused on the children, getting them ready for school and making breakfast, trying to distract herself from the growing unease. But even as she moved through the motions of the day, her mind kept returning to the same questions. Was it her imagination? Or was something more serious going on? It wasn't until she was alone in the kitchen, washing dishes, that the thought crossed her mind. What if Alex was having an affair? She immediately pushed the thought away, ashamed for even considering it. After all, Alex had always been a good husband. He was responsible, hardworking, and dedicated to their family. He wasn't the type of man who would betray his vows. Or was he? The seed of doubt had been planted, and once it took root, Sarah couldn't stop it from growing. Every interaction with Alex felt tainted by the possibility of betrayal. Every smile he gave her seemed to carry the weight of unspoken secrets. The once familiar comfort of their relationship had turned into a battlefield where she fought silently with her own suspicions. That afternoon, as she sat alone in the living room, Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. Her marriage was built on trust, and now that foundation felt fragile, as if it could crumble at any moment. She wondered if she was just being paranoid, or if there was more to Alex's behavior than she realized. But the more she thought about it, the more she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. She didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to face the possibility that her husband, the man she had loved for so long, might have betrayed her. But the evidence was starting to stack up, and Sarah could no longer pretend that everything was fine. Something had changed, and she didn't know how to fix it. She couldn't shake the feeling that her marriage was teetering on the edge, about to fall apart. But she also knew that if she confronted Alex, everything would change forever. She would never be able to unsee the truth, no matter how painful it was. And that terrified her. As the day wore on, Sarah felt a sense of helplessness wash over her. She didn't know what to do, and she certainly didn't know how to fix what was broken. All she could do was wait for the moment when everything would finally come to light. Sarah couldn't escape the growing suspicion that had been eating away at her. Her mind was plagued by the thought of what she might discover if she looked closer. The texts, the late hours, the strange behavior, it was all pointing to something she wasn't ready to admit. But as much as she wanted to ignore it, the truth loomed over her, suffocating her with each passing day. She had to know. One evening, as Alex left his phone unattended on the kitchen counter, Sarah felt a sharp pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by the urgency of the moment. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. She tried to calm herself, telling herself she was only looking for clarity, not confrontation. But deep down, she knew that the moment she unlocked his phone, her life could change forever. She hesitated for a brief moment, but then her fingers swiped across the screen, and she found herself staring at a message thread. It wasn't a random message. The name that flashed on the screen was Olivia, a name she didn't recognize. She scrolled up, her heart pounding in her chest. The messages were casual at first, nothing alarming. But as she continued to read, a pit formed in her stomach. The tone shifted. The words became flirtatious. Then there it was, an explicit message, confirming her worst fears. Alex had been having an affair. The text was brief but clear. "I can't wait to see you tonight." The world around her blurred. Her mind went into overdrive, trying to process what she had just read. Was this real? Was this truly happening? Her husband, the man she had trusted with everything, had betrayed her in the worst way. She felt nauseous, her breath shallow. She knew she needed to confront him, but the weight of the discovery left her paralyzed. She waited for hours before Alex came home. The thought of confronting him had her stomach in knots. She had no idea how to even begin. How could she look him in the eye, knowing what she now knew? He walked in, his usual easygoing self, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. He kissed her on the cheek, his movements casual, as if everything was fine. She stared at him, seeing the man she thought she knew, yet somehow, he seemed like a stranger now. The silence between them felt suffocating. Sarah couldn't hold it in anymore. She had to confront him. She stood up, her voice shaky as she asked, "Who is Olivia?" Alex froze, the color draining from his face. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. He tried to play it off, his voice calm but defensive. "What are you talking about?" Sarah felt a surge of anger rise up in her chest. She didn't want to hear his excuses. She had the evidence in her hands. She threw the phone onto the table, showing him the incriminating messages. "Don't lie to me, Alex. I know about the affair. I saw your messages." The room went quiet. The air was thick with tension. Alex's face contorted in disbelief, as though he had been caught off guard. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. It wasn't the guilt she had expected to see in his eyes, but rather a sense of defensiveness. He opened his mouth again, this time to explain himself, but Sarah didn't want to hear it. The betrayal was too much to bear. She had already seen enough. His voice broke the silence, but it only made things worse. "Sarah, please. It's not what you think." She laughed bitterly, tears stinging her eyes. "Not what I think. I saw everything, Alex. I saw the texts, the plans, the lies. How could you do this to me? He looked down, unable to meet her gaze. I don't know what to say.
I'm sorry.
It just happened. Her anger flared. Sorry? Is that all you can say? You've been lying to me for months, and now you're sorry? The words stung more than she anticipated. The realization that the man she had loved and built a life with was capable of this kind of betrayal was crushing. Alex reached for her hand, but she pulled away. She didn't want his touch. She didn't want his apologies. She needed answers, but nothing he said could undo the damage he had caused. I don't know how this happened, he continued, his voice weak, but I want to fix it. I never meant for it to go this far. She shook her head, her mind a whirlwind of emotions.
How?
How do you fix something like this, Alex? You've broken everything. The trust, the love, everything we built together. It's all a lie. The room fell silent again, but this time, the silence wasn't just heavy. It was suffocating. Sarah's heart was broken, and the pain was unbearable. She wanted to scream, to throw everything in her path, but instead, she just stood there, numb, as if she were watching her life unravel in slow motion. Alex's attempts to justify his actions fell on deaf ears. Sarah couldn't hear him anymore. All she could think about was the future she had once thought would be filled with love, trust, and happiness. Now, it seemed as if that future had been stolen from her, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. As Alex tried to apologize, Sarah stepped back, her emotions raw and exposed. I don't know if I can forgive you, she whispered, more to herself than to him. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. The words hung in the air like an unspoken promise, a promise that she was no longer the woman he had once known. Their marriage was no longer just a union of love. It had been shattered, and the pieces were scattered too far to ever be whole again. Sarah sat in the silence of their home, the weight of the confrontation still hanging heavily in the air. Alex's apologies, his excuses, everything he said felt like empty words. The hurt was too deep, too raw. The trust she had placed in him was shattered, and nothing he could say would ever undo the damage. She felt numb, as if her emotions had been stripped away, leaving only a hollow ache in their place. The man she had once known and loved now seemed like a stranger. Alex continued to apologize, his voice filled with regret, but it only made things worse. His remorse felt forced, like a last-ditch effort to salvage something that was already beyond repair. I never meant for this to happen, Sarah, he said again, his tone pleading. I love you, I'm sorry. The words stung, not because she doubted his love, but because they felt like a last-minute attempt to cling to something that was already lost. Sarah had spent years building a life with him, and now, everything they had shared felt like a lie. The images of him with another woman haunted her thoughts. The betrayal was suffocating, and she couldn't escape it. I don't know if I can do this, Alex, Sarah said quietly, her voice shaking. She wanted to believe him, to find some way to make it work, but the pain of what he had done was too much to bear. You've broken my trust. How do we fix something like this? How do I ever trust you again? Alex's face twisted in frustration, his emotions clearly at war with his desire to salvage their marriage. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Sarah. I'll go to therapy, I'll prove to you that I can change. Just give me a chance. Sarah shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. How do I even begin to believe you? How do I look at you and pretend that everything is okay? She stood up, pacing the room, unable to sit still. The emotional turmoil inside her was too overwhelming, too consuming. I don't even know who you are anymore, Alex. He reached out to her, but she stepped back, unable to face him. His touch felt foreign, like a betrayal in itself. I don't want to hurt you, he said, his voice cracking. I know I've made a mistake. I don't want to lose you. Sarah turned to face him, her eyes filled with pain. I don't know if I can forgive you, she whispered. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. She could see the desperation in his eyes, the fear of losing her, but it wasn't enough. The damage had been done. There was no turning back from this. Days passed, and the weight of the decision bore down on Sarah. Every conversation, Every glance at Alex felt like a reminder of what had been broken. The house that had once been filled with warmth and laughter now felt cold, empty. Sarah couldn't escape the memories of their happier times, the love they had shared. It felt like a cruel joke, a past that no longer mattered in the face of the truth. She tried to continue with her daily routine, but nothing felt the same. She couldn't focus on the kids, couldn't find joy in the little things that used to bring her comfort. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of Alex, the affair, the lies. Every time she looked at him, she felt like she was staring at the man who had betrayed her, not the man she had married. The emotional distance between them grew with each passing day. One evening, as she sat in the living room, Sarah found herself questioning everything. She had spent so many years believing in their marriage, in Alex, but now it felt like a cruel illusion. Was it all a lie? Was the love they had shared nothing more than a fleeting fantasy? She had always believed in the idea of forgiveness, in the possibility of healing after a betrayal. But now, that seemed impossible. The wound was too deep, and every attempt to heal it felt like an exercise in futility. Her thoughts turned to their children. How would they be affected by this? How would Emma and Noah understand the devastation unfolding between their parents? She didn't want them to see the pain, to witness the unraveling of their family, but it was already happening. She couldn't protect them from the truth. They would feel the tension, the sadness, and the brokenness in the air. No matter how hard she tried, their innocence would be lost. Sarah knew she had to make a decision. The question that kept haunting her was whether or not she could continue living with the man who had broken her trust. Could she ever look past the affair, the lies, and the betrayal? Could she rebuild what they had, or was it too far gone? The weight of the decision was unbearable. Alex's attempts to reconcile, to make things right, only seemed to make the situation worse. He didn't understand the depth of her pain, the overwhelming sense of betrayal that consumed her. He couldn't take back the hurt he had caused, and no amount of promises or apologies could change that. She had to face the reality that their marriage had been altered beyond recognition, and she was left to decide whether or not she could live with it. The silence between them grew longer, the distance between them wider. Each passing day felt like an eternity, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was suffocating in her own home. The love they had once shared seemed like a distant memory, a faded image she could no longer grasp. In the end, she realized that healing couldn't happen on her own. It required both of them to be willing to face the truth and rebuild what had been broken. But in her heart, she knew that the damage was too great. She couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies, no matter how much she still loved him. Sarah's decision was made, though it didn't come easily. She could feel the weight of it every time she looked at Alex, and yet, the thought of continuing to live in the shadow of betrayal was unbearable. She had tried to imagine a future where things could go back to normal, where she could look at Alex and not see the man who had broken her heart. But she couldn't. The images, the lies, the emotional scar, it was all too much. She realized that, in order to heal, she had to let go. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Sarah could barely look at him. The silence between them was louder than any words they could have spoken. Alex was still trying to salvage their marriage, still offering his apologies, but Sarah had already made up her mind. There was no turning back. The thought of staying in a marriage where trust was shattered, where the foundation was cracked beyond repair, was too much for her to bear. The love she once had for him was still there, but it was buried beneath the layers of hurt and betrayal. It couldn't be resurrected, not in the way she had hoped. "Alex," she began, her voice steady but firm. "I've been thinking a lot, and I don't think I can do this anymore. I can't stay in this marriage." Alex's face changed immediately, his features falling in shock. He opened his mouth to protest, but Sarah held up her hand, stopping him before he could speak. "I know you're sorry. I know you want to fix things, but the damage has already been done. I can't forget what you've done. I can't just move on as if nothing happened." Tears welled up in Alex's eyes as he reached for her hand, his desperation evident. "Sarah, please don't do this. I love you. I need you. I'll do anything to make it right." I'll change. I promise. She shook her head, pulling her hand away. You can't change what's already happened. You've hurt me, Alex, and I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Her heart ached as she spoke the words, but deep down, she knew they were true. She had tried to forgive him, tried to believe that they could move past this, but the trust was gone. The truth was, she wasn't sure if the man sitting across from her was the same person she had married. The man she had fallen in love with had been kind, loving, and trustworthy. The man sitting before her was a stranger, someone who had lied to her, betrayed her, and shattered the foundation of their marriage. She didn't know who he was anymore, and that realization made it impossible for her to continue living a lie. I don't want to hurt you, Alex, she continued, her voice breaking. But I can't keep pretending that everything is fine. We can't just move forward as if nothing happened. Alex's face crumpled in anguish, but Sarah remained firm. She had made up her mind, and despite the pain it caused her, she knew it was the only way forward. She had to be true to herself, even if it meant letting go of the man she had once loved. In the days that followed, Sarah's world felt surreal. It was hard to accept that the life she had known was now over, that the love she had shared with Alex was no longer enough to hold them together. She had to face the reality of their broken marriage, and it was painful in ways she couldn't have anticipated. The house, once filled with laughter and love, now felt empty. The future she had imagined, the family she had built, seemed like a distant memory. Alex, though devastated, began to accept what had to happen. His attempts to fix things slowly stopped, as he realized that Sarah's mind was made up. They continued to live in the same house for the sake of the children, but the tension between them was palpable. It was as if they were both walking on eggshells, trying not to stir up more pain, more heartbreak. There was no comfort in their presence, no warmth in their conversations. The emotional disconnect was undeniable. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she could breathe. The decision to let go of the marriage wasn't easy, but it brought a sense of clarity. She had spent so much time trying to hold on to something that was slipping through her fingers. Now, at least she could begin to heal. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be moments of doubt, moments when she would wonder if she had made the right choice. But deep down, she knew it was the only choice she could make. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah focused on rebuilding herself. She poured herself into her work, into taking care of her children, into finding pieces of herself that had been lost along the way. The process of healing was slow, but she could feel it. She began to rediscover her strength, her independence. She wasn't defined by the marriage that had fallen apart. She was Sarah, strong, resilient, and capable of moving forward. Alex, too, began to come to terms with the consequences of his actions. He was left with the fallout of his choices, and though he continued to express regret, the reality of what he had done was something he would have to live with for the rest of his life. There were no happy endings in this story, no moments of reconciliation or love rediscovered. The truth was, sometimes love wasn't enough to overcome betrayal. Sometimes, the only way to heal was to let go, even if it meant walking away from the person you had once trusted with everything. And as Sarah moved forward, she realized that the strength to move on came not from holding on to the past, but from embracing the future, whatever it might hold.